question we get quite often is what's going on? What's going on in the world? Like, what should we see start as far as some of the trends? So Sectrio actually manages the world's largest OT and IoT honeypot network. This allows us to grade some really unique insights of what's going on out there in the industry. And we try to break it down really simplistic over the last year into 5 main trends that we're starting to see. And then later on this slide, Preetham will talk about kind of the future trends that we're seeing. A little alarming, of course. But first thing we have is hackers are aligning globally. So previously you had state-run hacking groups as known as APTs, so advanced persistent threat groups. Freelance hackers, these established hacking groups, they're all in separate cells. Now they're starting to collaborate amongst themselves to do centralized targets. So they're geographically spread out, but they're actually hitting targets on the dark web, and it's open almost to the highest bidder to say, hey, this is our target, who can get in, who can find a weakness. And there's coordination between all these different groups, almost like a cloud-based virtualized hacking consortium. We've also seen that our teams keep a big pulse on the dark web. So we've seen actually recruitment ads and efforts for hackers increasing dramatically in the last 12 months, more so than ever before. We've also seen that some countries that weren't on the radar previously for those APTs are starting to pop up on the radar. Typically, China, North Korea, what have you. Russia, you've seen some of the typical news entities and some of the usual suspects that are out there, but we're actually starting to see other countries pop on the radar too. So it's just pointing again to that decentralized nature and coordination amongst global hacking entities. Pretty scary stuff. One of the second points that we're seeing as far as trends was it was all about the money. 2020 was the most profitable year for hackers. 2021 seems to be on target to set a new record for that. Being that ransomware attacks are basically the cornerstone to monetize all efforts for hacking. On average, it's taken entities $2 million to pay to get their data back for a breach. And this is globally, adding all that up in 2020, it's about $4 billion. And you've already actually started to see a lot of entities out there. Instead of cyber risk mitigation, they're rather just pay the insurance premiums, which are costing them dramatically, exponentially more amounts of money. Yeah, pretty scary stuff too. Third point we're seeing is a shift in targets. So previously we saw a lot of targets being the IT side of the house, going after your large IT tech firms. But those targets are starting to shift into manufacturing, again, critical infrastructure, hospitals, really targeting those Achilles of the networks being the OT and IoT networks. So devices that lack standards, or devices that are now on the network that they originally weren't intended to be on the network. And so those have a lot of vulnerabilities and issues that hackers are exploiting to get into those networks and start to move laterally across, even back into the IT side of the house if it's interconnected. We're seeing that almost a 91% increase on manufacturing plants over the last year, and 600%, I think it was 605% increase on hospital attacks, which is a double whammy considering COVID-19 and all the resources were spread pretty thin. Hackers were actually going after it thinking that, hey, limited resources, we can try to find a weakness and make as much damage and exploitation as possible. The fourth thing that we're seeing is botnets. So botnets are simply just malicious code being run on a computer or a device unbeknownst to the user for malicious intent. We're seeing that at the highest record level ever. So it's over a 500% increase from the year before. The really scary thing that we're seeing is that botnets are now specifically targeting critical infrastructure. So the coding and the setup for these botnets are now going after weaknesses or exploits or DDoS, denial of service attacks, to go after that critical infrastructure, as well as hospitals and manufacturing entities. And the last trend that we're seeing, again, we keep a pulse on the dark web. We're seeing over a 600% increase on sensitive data appearing on the dark web. And the scary thing about this, it's almost instantaneous. By the time the hack is not even found out about, but by the time the data is stolen, within minutes, it's appearing on the dark web, open to the highest bidder. So this includes everything like attacks in supply chain, manufacturing, critical infra, governments, data centers. It's just a honeypot of sensitive information. As soon as that information is pulled, it's immediately available to the highest bidder in the dark web.